Before we get started, I wanted you to know that as I was going through your book and reading your book, I was struck by something, and the thought that kept going through my head is, what inspired you? Where were you when you decided, I'm going to write a book about my grandfather, Nelson Mandela, but I'm going to write it completely from the perspective of being a grandson and in many respects, a son?
Well, this year we're celebrating 100 years of Nelson Mandela. So it is my sort of dedication to him. And also, it's a new perspective on Nelson Mandela. Nobody has written on him as being a human being. It's always the president, the revolutionary, right? The big man.
Yes.
So I just wanted to, first of all, be able to, make Nelson Mandela relate to young people, because every young person has a grandparent, right? Who they can think about, who told them a story, who's trying to teach them some kind of lesson, So that was really my main thing, to say that Nelson Mandela, for many young people, they don't really know him, right? They know him as the first black president of South Africa, who spent jail in 27 years, but nothing beyond that, he is the best example of leadership in the 21st century, right? You have all these leaders in today's world who will tell you about how great Nelson Mandela is, right? But do they follow in his footsteps? Do they use his values? They don't, right? So I said, okay, since these guys are not gonna do it, how do we then influence the young people to find the Nelson Mandela inside of themselves?
That's excellent. You write a lot in the book, though, about this interesting juxtaposition of the private and the ways that Nelson Mandela was very private about his family life, but also the public and serving as an example, and the pressure, right, of being the grandson of Nelson Mandela and having to sort of outperform in school, outperform in life, and how through transitions in school, through transitions as you grew, you sort of came to terms with that, reckoned with that, and got into a comfortable pace with it as you grew into a man. So can we talk a little bit about how that evolved and how you negotiated that with your grandfather?
Well, there's no negotiation, first of all, with my grandfather. What he says goes, you know what I mean? Like, his word is the final thing, that's it. And that's very typical in the African home as well. You don't ask questions, you do as you're told, pretty much. But of course, there was a lot of pressure. He once said to me, Ndaba, you're my grandson. Therefore, people will look at you as a leader. And therefore, you must get the best marks in class.
Yes. Straight A's.
I was like, Granddad, that's a lot of pressure now. I just want to get by, And I was a naughty boy. I was like sitting in the back of the class. But yeah, of course, as life progresses, you get to understand who you are, because at school, you just want to fit in. You just want to be treated like any other kid. You know what I mean? You don't want to be sticking out. And every time somebody comes, to school, a new person, a new teacher, or you go play sports against another, school, you travel to another school, you hear people whispering, that's Nelson Mandela's grandson. That's Nelson Mandela's grandson. Hey, do you know that's Nelson Mandela's grandson?
How did you evolve in that awareness? When you're writing about yourself as a child and you're saying, hey, listen, I was moved around from place to place, while my grandfather was in jail. Got to see him, you talk about the first time you saw him at 7 years old. And how someone saying to you, you're gonna go see your grandfather, Nelson Mandela, was like saying you're gonna see Michael Jackson, right? And it was just like, okay. But it was said so matter of fact. And then you also talk about the pressure of understanding that you were a Mandela. So how did that awareness that you're a Mandela and what that meant, how did you grapple with that as a teenager?
As a teenager, to be honest with you, I didn't want to grapple with it. That was the furthest thing from my mind. As a teenager, you just want to be like a teenager. You want to have fun, you want to do what other teenagers do. You want to, be naughty, basically. You want to run away. Yeah? That's pretty much. It only happened much later in life, to be honest with you. So when I started going to university, first year, of course, first year, right?
First year is
First year is first year, right?
We're just gonna.
I hardly went to class. I
No.
never went to class.
No. Fine.
Yeah, and then eventually you realize, okay, it's time to be serious now. I'm getting older. My friends are like beating me. My friends are graduating. I'm still in class, you know. And eventually you wanna get your shit together.
Yes.
Right?
But you spend so I read your book a few times, and then I listened to you read your book, and then I watched lots of interviews about this book. So I'm going to push you a little bit here, Ndaba, because
Sure.
you spend chapters 4 through 6 talking about the difficulty of your identity, both as Nelson Mandela's grandson, but also sort of grappling with the decisions that your parents are making. And at the time, they were sort of going off and studying. You were still living with your grandfather, and at a certain point, there was a decision made without sort of consulting with you that you would stay with your grandfather and that you would live with your grandfather. And then you talk quite deeply about what that meant for you, both as his grandfather, but also as a Mandela, and how you struggled with that decision, and that decision didn't include you, and that it was much larger than you, and that everybody was sort of witness to it. So I'm going to push you here to talk a little bit more about that.
Yeah, you see, that's the thing, you know, trying to be a normal kid. I'm not a normal kid. I live with my grandfather. I don't stay with my parents. I'm the only child at home, you
Yes.
know. It's me and my grandfather, and then literally 20 staff in the house, you know. So I'm looking for normality. I'm looking for something to say you are just a good boy. You're a normal boy, but nothing I can find, you know, that's around me. And when you go to school, wherever you go, you are treated like that special boy, you know what I mean? So I was just really looking for normality, and it was just very difficult to find it. I couldn't find it anywhere, you know. And so you end up doing all kinds of things, right, to make you feel normal, whether it's mind-altering substances, right? Smoke a little something, drink a little something.
You have no idea what you're talking about.
to get you away from that, right? But eventually, you know, it was really just accepting that, you know, all this normality that you're looking for, it's not for you, my friend. That is not for you. You have a special, different, particular roads that you have to walk on. And that road is not walked by many people. And so as you walk that road, you have to ask yourself, what are you going to do? Are you going to try to run away from the road? Or are you going to take the road by the horns? Huh? Grab it by the kahunas. Right?
Did you decide to do that?
You have to. You have to. You don't have a choice, you know. People in my position don't have a choice. We are privileged. Therefore, we have a huge responsibility, you know. So it's part of it's hard to strike that balance. It's hard to strike that balance in life.
So Ndaba talking now, right? This is Ndaba, the man who has grown up. But you did a really good job of throughout every single chapter of your book talking about the state of mind that you were in. And one thing that I found as a reader that is one of the most beautiful aspects of the book is the nuance and the sort of layers between, you know, you pick up this book and it says, you know, lessons from my grandfather, Nelson Mandela. And I said earlier, I said, you know, I read this book and I thought, I'm just like Ndaba Mandela, except that my grandfather's not Nelson Mandela. But really, when you read the book, you go back and forth between relating to the Fresh Prince of Bel-Air, right? There's this really beautiful passage where you talk about how much you could relate to the Fresh Prince of Bel-Air, right? Or your older brother was very much like him, you know, got sent away to live with relatives. In many ways, should be this sort of disadvantaged youth, but really the beauty of Fresh Prince of Bel-Air is how much the Fresh Prince teaches his extended family. And you talk about that, about how you did not grow up in the suburbs. You grew up in, you know, in the ghettos of Soweto, but you bring this extra dynamic to your grandfather's life, to that home, and also that you sort of see this parallel between this very different childhood and then this like very iconic American TV show, and then we'll talk a little bit more about some more parallels that you draw between sort of African American communities here and the experience in South Africa. But do you feel like that was your perspective as a man, or do you feel like sort of narrating the book, or do you feel like you actually had the understanding when you were a teenager that there was some parallels?
No, I felt those parallels. Like I said, there was no normality. I mean, for example, like, I don't know, if you ask some people what they wanted to be when they grew up, what did you want to be when you want to grow up?
They all wanted to be engineers at Google. Okay, no.
Can I get some
Raise
answers?
a hand. That's a live Annan's question.
Yes? Scientist. Teacher. A cop.
Yes.
These are the normal answers,
Yes.
right? An astronaut, you see? That was not me.
What did you want to be when you grew up?
I wanted to go to jail. I wanted to be a prisoner.
You wanted to be a gangster. You talk a lot about it.
I wanted to go to jail, pretty much, because let me break it down to you, okay? So, like in the book, my parents taught me, we're going to visit your grandfather in jail, right? So I had a typical image of what jail was like, right? Concrete bars, lots of security, dogs, etc., etc. But when we got there, as a 8-year-old boy, I didn't understand that actually your grandfather is in jail, but he's a political prisoner. So it's not a normal jail. It was actually a house more beautiful than the house I lived in, right? And I didn't understand they put him there in isolation to try and break him down mentally, right? To say, Nelson Mandela, for the rest of your days, when you come out of jail, spend the days with your grandkids, right? Denounce the ANC, denounce your comrades, right? And spend the rest of your days in luxury and leave this political life of yours. But we all know how that went, right? He stood true to his convictions, to his beliefs. So when we got there, it was a beautiful house that had a swimming pool. I never had a swimming pool, right? There was a chef who watched the Never-Ending Story. We met the man, of course, tall, dark, handsome man who was talking to us, each and every single one of us. What's your name? How old are you? What's your favorite subject? Very warm, right? So I said, wow, this is prison? I want to go to prison. This is the kind of life I want to live, you know what I mean? Because to me, it looked amazing, because I lived in a village at that time, not even in Soweto. And a village is much better than living in Soweto. A village is more like farm kind of style. Soweto is the ghetto. People living on top of each other, bottle stores everywhere. I mean, you know what it is.
We're familiar.
Yes. You know what it is.
Ghettos in the United States in many ways.
Yeah. So, when you watch TV, you get to see what's happening in the world. And there's the Fresh Prince, the coolest kid, right? But you watch the stories like he was living in a rough neighborhood, his mama got scared, then they took him to his uncle's house.
Yes.
Right? Me, the grandfather's house. You know what I mean? And that was a decision taken by my grandfather, not even by my parents. Because my grandfather wanted my parents to have an education because they never had the opportunity to go to school. So my father went to university for the first time at the age of 45. Qualified as a lawyer at the age of 50.
Yes.
Died at the age of 55 due to HIV/AIDS. So, again, normality. What is that?
What does that look like?
What is that? I don't know. All right?
Right. Well, thank you for sharing that, because that's another thing I think too that people don't realize is that it was an incredibly brave thing to say at the time, right, that your father passed away from HIV/AIDS, because it was something that's stigmatized and still is in many places.
Still is in many places, and although in South Africa it's going well, but because unlike any other disease, right, HIV/AIDS comes with this moral question. To say you got this disease because you were sleeping around, because you're promiscuous, because you're dirty. It's not cancer. It's you got it because you are doing something nasty. So therefore you are a bad person. Therefore you cannot disclose your status. You must hide, and people end up dying in silence. You understand?
Yes.
And so when my father, because my mother actually died from HIV/AIDS, and my family was still hush-hush about it when my mother died, 2 years before my dad. And then when my dad came out, again, my grandfather, played that lead role, because my cousin, when we discussed what we're going to say to the world, she said, well, we can say pneumonia or TB, because AIDS doesn't kill you, it kills your immune system, so you can't defend yourself against common illnesses. And he said, no, we shall not do that. We shall simply say, my son died of HIV/AIDS, full stop, right? And we went out. It actually happened inside my house, in the garden. We set up a little thing. We invited the media to come in, and my grandfather read the statement. And it was the first time a prominent family had actually disclosed to the world that we had been affected by HIV/AIDS. And so it gave other people courage to say, oh, Nelson Mandela's son died from HIV/AIDS. We can now talk about it because we are like Nelson Mandela's family. You understand? It was my father, it was my uncle, it was my brother, it was my cousin. So in many respects, that's a normality in our country, right? That's the kind of normality that I found, because in South Africa you have a whole generation of child-headed households.
Yes.
Because their parents all died from HIV/AIDS. So it's a very common thing.
And before, in your book, you talk about the generational loss. That's multiple generations, right? Even before sort of the HIV/AIDS crisis hits in the late 70s, early 80s, into the 90s. You talk about just the loss because of apartheid, just the loss of socioeconomic well-being, health, pride, culture, access. And then, the HIV/AIDS crisis begins to really hit. Your family continued to be, in many ways, an example of the ways in which you can supersede and triumph, but also in the ways that you're not immune to those challenges and the way that made it relatable to the rest of the community. How does that legacy continue today? How do you feel like the legacy of not just Nelson Mandela, but just the history of your family and how it serves as an example for what happened to so many communities? How do you feel like that legacy today continues?
Well, out of great tragedy, when the darkest, deepest things are happening, when the worst human atrocities are being committed, out comes the light, right? Nelson Mandela, the greatest leader that we know of in the 21st century, comes from one of the worst histories known to mankind. And that is a balance of life, right? And so for us, Nelson Mandela comes from a very poor background. My grandfather went to school. His first day at school, he went to school with no shoes on, wearing his father's pants. Because he could not afford to buy shoes or buy anything, so he wore his father's pants, right? And that's how he got his name. He got his name at the first day. So if a young person from a poor background with having almost nothing can grow and triumph and become this person that is known all over the world. When he was president, his name, Mandela, was the second most known name after Coca-Cola in the world. So for me, it says to me that if Nelson Mandela can do that, each of us can do that if you set your mind to it, right? For me, the legacy of Nelson Mandela is one of compassion. Passion is very important, right? Because you will come across hurdles, speed bumps, people who don't believe in you, right? And that's why it's important to dream. Because Martin Luther King had a dream, JFK, Rosa Parks, it all starts with a dream. And then you work at it, becomes reality. So for me, and you can imagine, I met Michael Jackson at my house.
Yeah, so talk about the birthday.
I met Fidel Castro at my house. Mike Tyson at my house. I didn't have to go to some special event. I remember one time, does anyone watch football here? Are there any football fans, soccer fans?
Show of hands.
Okay, nice. So I like Real Madrid, that's my team. And so I was in Cape Town and had a wild night partying. So I woke up with a hangover and literally I step outside my door and I look to the right and I see Ronaldo and Figo walking down. I'm like, no, man, I walk inside, I wash my face, brush my teeth quickly. I'm like, no, man. Go into the lounge, and it's indeed Figo and Ronaldo sitting in the lounge. I'm like, what the hell, you know? But the important thing is that whether it's the president of the USA, whether it's Oprah, whether it's whoever, my grandfather treated everybody equally. He treated them the same way as he treated Mama Oli, who cooked for us. Mike, who was the driver, Albert, who cleaned the garden. Because he understands that we each have the capacity and the potential to achieve greatness.
It's wonderful. So I'm going to talk to you a little bit about that sort of equilateral treatment, and also in your book how you discuss so much about family dynamics and how families, no matter who they are fundamentally families. They have, I think you say specifically, areas in which they come together, decisions that are made that others resent, opportunities that some are offered that others are not. And you talk quite a lot about that, how that is challenging for your family and how that continues to be a challenge today. If you had one thing that you could change about the last 5 years as it relates to how your family has come together, moved apart, upheld the legacy of Nelson Mandela, what is it? And how do you intend to change it?
5 years.
5 years, yeah. I'm giving you some breath so you can be picky. You can choose 5 years.
I don't know about the 5 years, to be honest with you. But, for me, we need more unity. We need more love. Because what's happening is that competition is good, but also competition gets to a point where it's bad, where it's negative, competing to the level where you push your brother down and you don't want to acknowledge him or go with him or be together. That is negative competition for me. So that is the one thing I would like to change. But also, these are all normal family dynamics.
That's right.
Each and every single one of us who come from a family experience that in our families, So for me, it's, we should not be caught up in it. We should always try, at least try, even if, they cut you out of whatever event, always incorporate your family. Because for me, I wouldn't be here in this position today if I didn't have my family.
But you talk a lot about counseling and reunification in the way that Nelson Mandela dealt with South Africa as a new nation, right? You talk about how you really thought of struggle as black and white, as, sort of white people being, oppressive all of the time, and black people sort of needing to fight and resist that. But Nelson Mandela in the beginning and the formation of the country took a very different tact. How did that develop, and how did that inform your perspective now?
Well, I think you have to go through it as well,
Yes.
like Nelson Mandela went through it, He was obviously fighting against the white apartheid government. And, at some point they got frustrated. They felt that their peaceful protests and marches were not going anywhere, and felt that they need to hit back at the enemy, which they did. So Nelson Mandela actually trained military 6 months in Algeria, 6 months in Ethiopia with Emperor Haile Selassie. For those who are Rastafari or Jamaican who know who that is, great emperor of Ethiopia, and came back into the country, organized his comrades, and started bombing the apartheid system. So Nelson Mandela was not always peaceful and forgiving.
Right, but then he develops that. So how did that transition happen for you, and how did it happen for the country, right? Because at one point, that's the expectation, is he was very different than, you talked about Dr. Martin Luther King. You talked about sort of civil disobedience came from that. But Nelson Mandela took a completely different tact. He took a tact that was more like by any means necessary. And then there is a shift when the country comes into its formation of having to do the reunification. How do you feel like that evolution happened, and where do you think the country is at now with it?
I think for me it was really through traveling, meeting people from different backgrounds. In our country, the white people, they are still stuck in those caveman areas, what I call it, and it's very hard for them, because they don't understand that our country was built by black and white people, right? It was built by everybody there. Yes, you designed it, and you had the machines and the engineering, but who actually did the physical work? It was black people.
That's right.
So both black and white people built this country. And so I was also quite angry at white people, in South Africa. But then when I traveled, and that's also why I started the Africa Rising Foundation.
Yes.
I met complete strangers, white people, you meet them and they want to help you. And you're like, wow, okay.
Maybe you're all right.
They're not so bad. And then, you continue and you meet strangers and you're like, wow, but these people, and then you go back home, it's like, oh, but these ones are still stuck back in the days. And then you travel, you're like, hey, but we're moving forward here.
Yeah.
But then you go back home, you're like, but we're still stuck.
Yes.
So you realize that actually, because you are exposed, because you're privileged enough to travel and see the world at large, shouldn't you then go back home and show them the better way? Shouldn't you go home and try and inspire them to say, guys, we can actually move forward in a way that is beneficial for all of us. For all of us. And so that was one of the major sort of things that happened to me, the traveling, meeting people, and seeing a different perspective, And that's why I think it's such an important thing to travel, because you learn about yourself as much as you learn about other people.
That's right.
And you learn the different cultures teach you how people do the same things you do, but in a different way. And there's no substitute for that kind of learning.
It's excellent. I want to thank you, because I want to open it up for questions, but I deeply want to thank you for writing a book that takes us through the very personal and political, but mostly enriching story about you and your family and growing up with your grandfather. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Just want to open it up. There are mics on either side, so go ahead and line up for any questions that you might have, and we have 15 minutes for questions. So I'm going to take about 6 or 7 questions for the audience. Otherwise, I'm going to keep grilling, because I have many more questions right here.
I saw a lady there with the blue top. She wants to ask a question.
There you go. Any questions?
No?
We'll let it sit in the silence for a few minutes while they decide. It just takes them a few minutes. Yes, please say your name.
I'm Kati, and thank you for coming to Google today. I guess I just want to keep going on this point. You're talking about travel and how that changed your perspective. Is the answer to world peace travel for the average person? Should the United Nations become a travel agency and just move people around?
No, of course not. It should not be a travel agency. But I definitely urge people to travel, because you guys work for Google. You have lots of money. You guys are rich. So travel at least once a year. I mean, you have money. Yes, I think it would be a great opportunity to allow ordinary people, everyday people, to be able to have that opportunity, especially young people. I work a lot with Americans. They travel to our village, they sponsor us, we do all kinds of programs. So now we're working on a program to take some of my kids in our village to bring them here, for 2 weeks and do the whole thing. I think it's very important. And what's also important, just as much as travel, is mentorship. Mentorship today, is not like it used to be before. Like, we growing up wanting to be, lawyers, doctors. Now you ask the kids what they want to be. They want to be DJs, right? And dancers, and super creative in that creative space. But those people are not always the best role models, because they don't even acknowledge their own role, the influence they have on young people, right? So it's very important that we mentor and take time to mentor young people. And I say to everybody, what does it take out of you to sit with a young person 1 hour a week on a Saturday? It doesn't take anything, right? 1 hour a week, sitting with a young person, finding out how their week was, questions from their homework, doing anything. Even if you sit with somebody, you in your beautiful apartment in Chelsea or Tribeca or wherever you are in Harlem, right? And you took to a young person in Togo, in a village, in Unu, anywhere. But, our kids, they finish high school without even touching a computer. So how are we going to be able to compete and stand shoulder to shoulder with global citizens when my kids don't even touch a computer by the time they finish high school? So it's important that we bring this access to information, this access to the world, to young people, whether it's through mentorship or traveling. Those, for me, are the two critical things that we need to do more of.
Thank you. I'm just going to take another question.
I'm trying to reach the mic because I'm so shy. Thank you for coming here today. I wanted to touch back on where you expressed that you were angry at the whites in South Africa because you didn't understand until you ventured out through travel. Now, we all in this room know that there are parts of the U.S. today where a lot of our colored folk are not exposed to the opportunities to travel, and that some of our children may very well be angry because they are not, aware unto what, connecting with other people outside of the, situations or circumstances that they may be going through, like through poverty. So how do you feel about, how would that shift for kids that may not have access to those resources to sort of broaden the way that they may think or experience interactions with different races and cultures?
How can that shift for young people?
Okay, so you stated that, you grew up privileged, and so you were allotted the experiences to travel and meet others, even though at some point you were angry at the whites in South Africa, and that meeting people, other whites in other countries, helped you to break that mental state that you were in. So I'm saying that you do have, even here, where there are some children that may never get the opportunity to travel, being that their parents may not be able to afford it or they don't have parents. How would you advise would be a way to shift that focus in the circumstance they're in right now? How would they be able to break out of that?
What's your advice to young people here in the States who may not be able to travel?
Have that, yeah.
Thank you.
Well, we need to empower young people to believe in themselves so that they can understand that they are the masters of their destiny and that they can achieve anything they set their mind to, right? So that's why mentorship is so important. Because when you tell a young person to dream, and I want them to dream so big that their dream scares them, right? The dream that they dream, they must think that it's impossible to achieve. Because if you think about Nelson Mandela, at that moment, people thought it would be impossible to achieve freedom. When they started organizing themselves and saying we need to hit back at the system, it was his PA, Barbara Masakela, very powerful lady, told me that it was only the two of them in the class. And the rest of the class, 40 people, said, no, stop this, you're going to get us in trouble with the white people. When you start coming here talking about freedom, you're going to get us in trouble with the white people. Stop your nonsense, right? And because they were dreaming and they believed so much, so that's what we have to do to our young people. We have to give them that opportunity and the freedom to dream, to make them understand that they are the masters of their destiny. And we have to surround them with people that encourage them every day to dream. People that love them, who want to see them succeed, who want to see them grow, Because you don't have the opportunity to travel or anything, but in your own place, you need to surround yourself with people that believe in you. And we have to do the same thing for our kids, to make sure that they're in an environment, even they see, terrible things happening around them. But if they have one or two people in their lives who believe in them wholeheartedly and will do anything to make sure they succeed, to give them that encouragement is very important. That's what I think.
What I hear you saying is that in the case of Mandela, he had one other classmate who believed in him. And that's really all it took for him to see beyond the circumstance, beyond the potential anger or repercussion to action. And we need to make sure that we supply our children with at least one person who believes in them and can move them forward. Thank you for that.
So tell us more about what you do with Africa Rising, and what are your dreams for building a better Africa?
Yes.
Thank you. So we started Africa Rising because we realized that people outside the continent had very little understanding of Africa. And most of the understanding that they have was negative.
Yes.
That Africa is a place of poverty, war, disease, dictators. And the only positive thing really is safari. Right? So the positive things in Africa is the animals, not the people, the animals. So as I traveled, I said, no, man, we have to do something about this.
Yes.
And so we went back home, gathered our friends. At the time I was working for Investec, which is the number one or one of the top investment banks in Africa. So I gathered all the 8 people that worked there, all the 8 black people that worked there. And when I was trying to explain to them, they already were on the same perspective as me. They felt the very same way.
Wow.
And I realized that it was nothing special to me. It was on the minds and the hearts of young Africans. that people need to engage with Africa, on a much more positive level. Because majority of people don't know that the top 7 growing economies in the world are in Africa, right? When you look at Hugo Boss or Louis Vuitton or H&M, all the inspiration to design those clothes are coming from Africa. I don't have to tell you about the music and dance, you already know, right? But everything now that you see is really getting inspired from Africa. So I want people to travel to Africa, to come and spend a holiday. You go to Mauritius, which is an island on the east coast of Africa. You go to the west coast of Africa, right? There's another beautiful island, or many beautiful islands, right? You go to Mozambique, Tanzania, Zanzibar. The most splendid crystal blue water, pink lakes, pink sand, natural pink lakes. Where have you ever seen that, right? Only in Africa. So for me, it's about empowering the new generation of African leaders to be at the forefront of Africa's development so that they can be the number one beneficiaries of the development that's taking place, not the multinational corporations that are coming just to take away the value. I want Africans to be at the forefront so that they empower themselves so that we can break the cycle of poverty that exists. I dream of an Africa where we don't know, I don't need a visa to go to Nigeria. Because right now I need a visa to go to Nigeria, and vice versa, right? I dream of an Africa where the leaders are actually there to take care of the people and actually do what their job is supposed to do. Because currently leaders are there to fill up their bank accounts, using state resources to put in the pocket, right? Not all, but majority. Majority of the leaders don't want to step off. You've got a guy who's been a president for 27 years. Do you know the longest serving president was from a country called Gabon? 40 years.
40 years.
40 years the man was president. How ridiculous is that? All right? So I want a more united Africa, an Africa that trades more with itself than with China or with Europe. Because we have everything that we need in order for us to stop exporting iron ore or rough diamonds. We can actually produce beautiful rings, right? And beautiful clothes, and not always just be exporting, primary products.
Yeah. Control the entire cycle of development.
Yes, we need the whole value chain.
Yeah.
The whole value chain. And we have it. But of course, without the leadership, it becomes very difficult.
Thank you. I'm going to take one last question and then a few closing statements, and we're going to get going. Yes.
Hi, I'm Christina. Thanks for coming today.
Thank you.
Actually just moved back here after living in Kenya for 6 years, and I work on the Africa region.
Nice.
So I would love to know how can Google, or what role can Google play in helping Africa Rising and your mission?
Just took my last question. That's excellent. Thank you.
Do you want me to be honest with you?
Yes.
I traveled to the Google Zeitgeist 3-4 years ago. It was in Arizona, Phoenix. And I met all the top dogs there.
You didn't meet me there. I wasn't there.
Not Where were you? Where were you?
Continue.
Hey, where? Nah.
Continue.
Nick Cash at the time. All the top guys. Lorraine Tohill. Where's she at? She's a lovely lady. Anyway, so there was a Google person who was now set in South Africa. And that person was there to make business, right? To make business. They were not there to support, to encourage, no. They were there to establish a business. So Google needs to change its perspective. You have so much money. Why are you always looking for more money? What are you going to do with all this money? Are you going to die in your grave with a Ferrari? Are you going to bury yourself in a Ferrari under the grave?
I'm not
You
going to.
understand what I'm saying? So Google needs to also look at how can they grow with the people,
Right.
not take from the people, but grow with the people. You need to train and empower young minds to become at the forefront of this development that's taking place, and not always look at it from that perspective to say, oh, there's a huge growing young population here. The buying power in the next 10 years is going to be over $1 trillion. How do we make sure that we get a big pie? Want a big pie? Want a big piece of that? No. How do we make sure that we're helping young people to break the cycle of poverty so that they can live better lives? And so they don't have to struggle with HIV/AIDS. That's what Google needs to do.
I'm smiling because we're often told that you have to make a business case for doing the right thing, but we don't need a business case. We can just do the right thing. That's what I hear you saying.
Nelson Mandela says, time is always ripe to do right.
Thank you. And with that, we're going to close. Thank you so much for joining us at Google New York.
Thank you. Thank you.